a thief on the cross. Let me tell you about another thief I met. On my first visit to Ghana, West Africa, to teach the Bible at a Bible college there, I was working in the compound, just doing something to the car one day. And the compound, of course, several missionary homes surrounded by a common wall. I heard a commotion working itself down the dirt road, which was kind of a horseshoe shape and bent, wrapped around our compound and went out the other way. I heard a commotion coming down the road, and I immediately recognized what it was because I had seen it before. They had caught a thief. Now, in Ghana, when you catch a thief, you take justice into your own hands because you have very little provisions and the police are corrupt. And so what they usually do to a thief is they beat him severely and let him go. I went out to the gate of the compound and looked. There was 50 or 60 young people, smiles on their faces like they were having a big old time, with sticks, clubs, machetes, an axe, and rubber hoses. And there in the middle was a rather tall fellow, blood streaming down his face, a large gash in his head. He had a tire around his neck. And when I came to the door of the gate of the compound, they all stopped and they looked at me because we were the only Obruni in the area, the white folks in the area. They were wondering what I would do if we would stop the proceeding. But you know, when you're in another culture, you really don't know what to do sometimes. You don't want to interfere with their system of justice. And so I just turned and went back to my work, figuring that they would give him a severe beating and he'd learn his lesson. I went back to work, and a missionary who was living on the compound that we were sharing came over to us. Now, this missionary was from a different denomination. They believe really a different gospel. We just happened to make his acquaintance for the summer. And he said, "Hey, did you see the thief?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "They're going to burn him." I said, "What do you mean they're going to burn him?" And he said, "Well, that tire around his neck, they got full of kerosene, and they're going to light it, and they're going to burn him." That, friends, is called a Nigerian necklace over there. And so I said, "Well, we've got to do something about this." So we walked across the other side of the compound. They had now looped around to the other side. When we went out that gate, there he was, collapsed in the mud. He still had the tire around his neck. He was thoroughly drenched in kerosene. There was a young teenager standing above him with a can. He had just poured the kerosene. Another teenager standing above him getting ready to strike a match. We worked our way through the group and we said, "Wait a minute, can we talk to this man? We're sofu, that means preachers. Can we just talk to him for a minute?" Rick began to ask the crowd, was there any accusers? Were there any witnesses? There were none. And as he did, I knelt down to talk to this fellow. And I said, "What is your name?" He said, "Benjamin." I said, "Benjamin, can you understand English?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Benjamin, I may not be able to help you and save you, but I can tell you how to have eternal life. Do you understand?" "Yes." And in the precious few seconds that I had with him, I explained to him the gospel of grace and the way of salvation. Now, to make a long story short, we were able to get him up amidst the protests of the crowds and get him off to a hospital from which he later fled, because if you saw the hospitals there, you'd flee too. But the point of my story is not, I don't know if I'm going to see Benjamin in heaven. It's not the point of my story. The point of my story is I had a message for a dying thief in the mud that no other religion in this world could have brought him. Do you understand that? Do you understand that the gospel of grace, through simple faith, is a message for a young child, for a dying thief on the cross, a dying thief on the mud, a pagan Philippian jailer? It's the only message of hope. It's the only message of certainty. It's the only message of security that brings assurance. I don't apologize for the gospel of faith. God has made salvation available to anybody, anywhere, anytime. Selah. I think we have some minutes left if you'd like to interact, discuss.
When you were going over Acts chapter 16 there, referring to the Lord there and how it implies deity and so forth, in the very first definition you have here on the page about acknowledging Christ as Lord and Master and so forth, you distinguish between acknowledging there and simply believing. I mean, obviously, as Creator, God's our Maker. He has the authority to do with us whatever He wants to do. So how do you differentiate? I mean, can you explain that a little better as far as the difference between simply acknowledging Him and later on we see submission to Christ? That's kind of a different thing.
I think that the question is in Acts chapter 16, what is the difference between acknowledging Christ as God and submitting to Him?
No, I'm just, my question has to do with the first statement here in the handout you have. And what disagreement would you have with that as far as acknowledging Christ as Lord and Master? Obviously, submission to Him is something that seems like somewhat different than simply acknowledging that that's what He is. In faith, you realize that Christ is who He claims. Jesus is the Christ. He is God incarnate in human flesh. And as such, as our Creator, He is our Master. That's just who He is. Not necessarily that we're submitting to Him and trying to get saved by submitting to that. But in order to be saved, if you understand who He is, that's just who He is by definition.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying, that acknowledging Him is not necessarily submitting to Him. There's an objective sense in which we acknowledge who He is. Just as I can acknowledge that Bill Clinton is our president and yet not submit to him subjectively. And so we can acknowledge who Jesus is, and we must acknowledge who He is for salvation. He is able to save us. He is one who is able to save us. Now that ought to imply a lot. And someone who acknowledges that ought to understand that He, as the authority, is divine, and that He is living, and there's a lot implied in that. And in fact, I would say it's implied also that if He is divine, you ought to serve Him, of course. You see, it's implied but not required.
It seems to me that what he's saying is, what are you saying that's any different than what Gentry says in the first statement?
Okay.
That's his question.
Okay. I'm trying to find Gentry's quote. Gentry's quote talks about two different sequential acts, but one act of pure trust and faith. Well, what he does is he takes faith and he puts into faith his first sentence, making Christ as the Lord and Master of one's life. And so, see, we are saying something different. Gentry is saying that to believe means to make Jesus the Master of one's life, to submit all of your life to Him. What we're saying is that believe means to be convinced that His promise of eternal life is true for us.